Welcome to Measuring Performance of a Scrum Master. Thank you for coming to my session. Quick raise of hands. How many of you are Scrum Masters? Quite a few, cool. How many of you are working directly with Scrum Masters? Okay, and how many of you don't know what a Scrum Master is? All right, cool. What are you doing here? Just kidding. All right, who am I? Just quickly, you might have heard from yesterday's talk. So I'm an Agile consultant, Agile coach in Vienna, in Austria at the moment. I slid into the, let's say, Agile business world in 2012, started off as an interim Scrum Master and have tried several things in between, such as being a social impact entrepreneur. I spoke about that yesterday, about how I started a lean startup for refugees. So but that's my full-time job, and my big passion is Agile coaching and working with Scrum Masters especially. So why am I speaking about this? Why are you here maybe? I'm speaking about this because, Agile is not young anymore. Scrum is not young anymore. The Agile Manifesto was signed for the first time 18 years ago. So when we Agile experts go into companies, or whenever companies say, hey, we want to go Agile, we want to introduce Scrum, we say, okay, yeah, fair enough. But you do realize that you need this new role called a Scrum Master. And every Scrum team should ideally have one Scrum Master. We all agree on this. That's fine. But how often do we actually ask or say, well, this is actually the impact that we are expecting from Scrum Masters? For some reason, I feel like we're not talking about that. And so in order to start today's session, I would like you to actually turn around to your neighbor, to someone that you haven't spoken to yet, and discuss the following question. What impact do you expect from a great Scrum Master? How would you notice that? So turn around to your neighbor, turn around to somebody that you haven't spoken to yet, introduce yourselves, and for the next 3 minutes, discuss what you expect from a Scrum Master. What impact? Thank you. Could I hear some examples? Anyone? What did you discuss? That they make themselves redundant. Because the team is so self-organized, it's so good that it's not, the Scrum Master is not needed anymore. What else? Come on. Okay, to increase that, or to at least stabilize it and then increase it. Okay. What else?
From my perspective, I'm seeing a good Scrum Master as someone who keeps track of how we're really progressing. But as a developer,
So the Scrum Master should look at whether the team is making progress. Sorry, this is just really loud. Whether the team is making progress so that people who are developing can actually focus on their job. Okay, one more. Come on. Making everything flow. And one more in the back. So team spirit by ways of being a good psychologist. Did I understand that correctly? Okay, so to be into psychology. All right, thank you very much. So I absolutely agree with all of you, what you've said so far. But the big question remains, how do we actually measure this? How do we know that a Scrum Master is doing his job or her job correctly? And why I'm actually talking about this is because for the past few years, since going from company to company and actually helping Scrum Masters, helping organizations to become more agile or progress along the journey of agility, I've noticed several things. Firstly, I've noticed that actually the expectations are not the same. So people are not communicating properly about what they're expecting of each other, especially of Scrum Masters, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about this role. And I can see this by people just saying, oh, we need a Scrum Master, so let's just take somebody. Typically, let's take former project managers, let's take former product managers. I've seen it as well, although they often go into product owner roles. I've seen the whole, we have an intern, so let's take that person. Nobody is really discussing about what do we expect from a Scrum Master. They're talking about old roles and where can we put them. So that's creating lots of misunderstanding. Second thing I'm seeing is that Scrum Masters that are really having an impact are getting more and more frustrated because the organization is not seeing it, they're not being valued. They're living in a world of constant change, constant need for improvement, and they still see so many, let's say, fighting against windmills. So they're getting more and more frustrated because they're not actually seeing the bigger picture of how they're really making an impact. And the third thing I'm noticing, and this is generally, I'm noticing that for some reason metrics and KPIs are just really negatively seen. So nobody likes them. They're seen as something, I don't know, let's say something negative that comes from the management, and we need to change the system in order to improve them instead of actually seeing the bigger picture. So KPIs and metrics are not a good thing, apparently. I think that they can be used in a very positive way, and this is what I'm talking about today. So let's go maybe all the way back to what do we actually expect from a Scrum Master? What is a Scrum Master supposed to be doing? And what we really all know is that the responsibility, so we're talking about the responsibility, is actually to ensure and to increase a Scrum team's productivity. How do we measure that? If you haven't seen it yet, Ian the Scrum Master, the video, go check it out on YouTube. So in order to ensure and increase the productivity of the Scrum team, how does the Scrum Master do this? So if you look at the Scrum Guide, for example, you can see that there's really 3 aspects to the role that you can identify, really. So the Scrum Master is on the one hand a facilitator, on the other hand the servant leader, and thirdly the change agent. And so I'm going to try to actually inspire you, because of course I don't have the perfect answer, because otherwise I'd probably be rich and famous, but I have some ideas of how you could do this, of how you could measure yourselves if you're a Scrum Master, or how you could actually have a discussion with the Scrum Master of how this could be measured, the impact. So I'm trying to separate the metrics that I discovered, that I found, that I'm using myself, into these 3 aspects of the role. So if we look at the first 5, so I'm going to give you altogether 15 metrics, and I've split them into these 3 aspects of the role. And so the first 5 are about facilitation. How good is the facilitation of the Scrum Master making an impact? So if we look at the first most obvious aspect of facilitation, it's facilitation of meetings. So we're talking about the efficiency of the meeting and how that is increasing. So what do we want? We want to increase meeting efficiency. How can we measure that? Well, how about we look at the cost of the average team member, multiply that by the minutes that we're saving due to a meeting becoming more efficient. That's pretty much how much money the Scrum Master is saving the organization due to having more efficient meetings. This is efficiency. So let's have a look at the second metric. That would be effectiveness, because we also want the meeting to become more effective, because if we're only looking at speeding up, we might have a problem about the actual goal of what comes out at the end of the meeting. What would be a good metric for effectiveness? I don't know about you, but I use a lot of ROTI, so return on time invested. So it's just feedback at the end of the meeting. So you invested, let's say, 1 hour. How much return on investment would you have gotten for that? I use simple flip charts, really, post-its on there. Sometimes they have something on it. Sometimes they just have the numbers. So that would be one option, just to see the trend over time. Or, because effectiveness, in my opinion, has also got to do with how active is the team itself. So just to keep a tally on, how much are team members or the people in the meeting actually participating. Because if there's always just one person talking, we should really think about whether we need this meeting. So that would be a way of measuring the facilitation and the actual learning which comes out of meetings. The third metric that I want to introduce you to is actually the rise in the team's buzz factor. Everyone know what a team's buzz factor is? It's a very positive metric. It's the amount of people that can leave after days of work and go out on the street and can be run over by a bus, and the project's still working, or the product's still working. So that is the buzz factor. So if the buzz factor is 1, you've got a problem. Because if this person gets sick, this person goes on holiday, or this person gets run over by the bus, which I really hope not, you'll have a problem. So we want the buzz factor to increase. How do we do that? Well, there's many, many ways, but I really like using the team skills matrix. So you make let's say an Excel or spreadsheet or whatever, really, and actually, it looks like that. Write down the skills that you need for the project or the product. Write down the names of the team members, and actually give yourselves 360-degree feedback on where you find yourselves on the skill matrix. How much are we actually covering as a team? Do we have enough people covering the most important skills, the most important competencies? And then to actually watch this over time. So in order to make sure that the skills matrix increases, so the skills are spread more equally across the team. That is something that you can actually actively measure. Why? Because and this is really important to me. Facilitation, at least in German, I don't know about Swedish, in German it's often translated into facilitation of meetings. Nobody ever thinks about facilitation also meaning facilitation of learning, facilitation of knowing about Scrum, these kinds of aspects of facilitation. So that's metric number 3. Metric number 4, as I said, facilitation also includes the understanding of Scrum. This is in the Scrum Guide, very, very important to the role of the Scrum Master. I mean, that's what he's called. So how do we measure that? There's many ways. I would say you've all probably had a new team at some point, and how often you have to explain to somebody, well, this is why we're doing a sprint retrospective today. This is why we should be doing this. I don't know about you, but I've heard the whole, really, do we have to do this today? Can we leave out the sprint retro? Like, we don't have time for that. You probably have all heard that, especially in the beginning when introducing Scrum. So it might be a good idea just to, make a tally, keep a tally on how often you have to explain to somebody, well, a sprint retrospective makes sense because of this, or sprint planning is this, that. And actually not just to yourself, to your team, but actually to also people outside of the team. So just to see whether that trend is going downwards, meaning either everyone's tired of asking you, or they've actually started to understand it. So the last metric that I want to introduce you to in terms of facilitation is actually the decrease in the amount of time and money lost to context switching. Because we all know Weinberg's study about how if we have to switch context, then we lose a lot of efficiency and effectiveness, really. So how do we do that? It's pretty simple, actually. Like, there's many ways of doing that. I would suggest just, I don't know, take a Post-it, or keep a tally again. How many times are you actually interrupted in the sprint? Or how many times are there things that are coming into the sprint that you're supposed to be doing that were not supposed to happen in the sprint, that were not planned for? And just keep a tally of that. So the more that decreases, the more you know that as a team, or the more you're protecting the team out of external factors. If you haven't had a look at Weinberg's study yet, do have a look. Gerald Weinberg, he pretty much showed that if you're working on several projects at the same time, or several tasks even, the amount of time spent to the amount of time lost, or the amount of energy lost, increases the more projects you're doing in parallel. Why do we want that? Because we want to improve on living the Scrum values, and one of them is focus. So these are the metrics that I've got as an idea for how you could measure the impact that you're having as a Scrum Master on your facilitation aspect. How many of you are using some of these metrics? Okay, anyone using something else to measure the facilitation aspect? Okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. That's why I'm here. All right, so let's look at the next 5 metrics for the servant leader role aspect. So, first metric I've got for you today is servant leader. We want to increase people's happiness. We want to make sure that the team runs sustainably, even if we're not there anymore. So how do we do that? We need to make sure that people are individually happy and that they're happy in a team. How do we measure that? One option would be actually to have a daily happiness index on the door, just to, there's a photo, yeah, just to put a mark, put a Post-it, put a dot, just say, hey, today I actually think I actually achieved something at work. Today was a very good day. I felt very effective. I felt this was a good day. So just to do this at the very end of the day, just walking out of the door and putting a Post-it up. Very simple. And just again, seeing the trend over time. Another option would be to actually do this at the sprint retrospective every 2 weeks, or however long your sprints take, and actually do this as a team together, a happiness rater. Or if you want to do it a bit more, let's say, official, or a bit more professional, then you can always, for example, online you've got the Gallup employment engagement survey, or you've also got the 5 dysfunctions of a team self-check, I think it's called. So all of these things you can actually Google and do this online. Some of them are free, some of them aren't. But actually just to have a look again at the trend, is the team becoming more happy, is it worse, etc. So this is a photo of the 5 dysfunctions, because we want to improve team performance, and the happier people are at work, the better their performance is. Metric number 7, again, raising team spirit. I was thinking of this for quite a long time, and I think one of the main factors of how to measure whether you're working as a team is actually your unplanned overtime. Because if I'm doing overtime, I'm working in a team, I'm working in a Scrum team, we plan things together, we're planning the day together. If I have to stay longer, that means we didn't plan well, we didn't commit well, we're not working as a team, because otherwise the entire team would be staying longer. And that is more unrealistic than one person staying longer. So the unplanned overtime index is in my opinion, a good way to measure that. You can do this really simply. You can, for example, just when leaving, again, your team room or team door, going through the team door, you can just put a ping pong ball into a vase, and just for every hour that you had to work longer than you had actually planned to be working. I know a lot of you have all-in contracts. Some people have, half-day jobs, etc. That's fine. You still, even if you're doing an all-in, if you have an all-in contract, you still know when you're working overtime. Like, you are aware of that fact. It's a gut feeling and an emotional factor. So why do we want that? Again, improving the Scrum values. For example, commitment. The 8th, I think it is, 8th metric improvement of predictability. So how do we measure that? We have a look at what did we commit to, or what did the Scrum team commit to during the sprint planning? How much are they actually going to deliver? And then how much did they actually deliver at the end of the sprint? I did this at a client, for example. It's really simply done. Didn't even use Jira or anything. You've got on the one hand the blue, I think it is. The blue is what the team said. Okay, we really want to. We're committing to, for example, 18 goals. These are not story points. These are actual goals. So just an amount of goals they want to reach. This is, funnily enough, a management team. They said they're going to do 18 things within the week, weekly sprints, and they only delivered 9. And then after a while, 27, 15, 26, 11, and that just continued. And you can see that the predictability got better, even when they split into 2 teams at some point. So just to keep track of that. Again, why do we want that? We want to improve on living Scrum values, i.e. commitment. Metric number 9. We want to increase self-reflection. Why do we want that? We heard already in the beginning, we want to make ourselves redundant. A very good Scrum Master at some point is not needed anymore because the team is so self-organized already. How do we notice that? One idea would be actually to measure how many impediments or maybe ideas for improvement are actually voiced by the team itself. Because especially in the beginning, it's always the Scrum Master going around saying, oh, that's an impediment, oh, that's an impediment, oh, that's an impediment too. And the team's always like, oh, what is he talking about? Like, what does he want from us? This silly word impediment that we never heard of before, hearing about Agile. But actually to see whether the team is getting that mindset as well, of noticing things and actually voicing them because we can change them and we are here to change them. And that was really interesting to me. That was actually the same client as before. This is in the production, in actual, in the production field. And what was interesting, because if you're working in production, in German KVP, so we're talking continuous improvement process is actually a very well-known thing. Like, people do that all the time. And what we did at the end, we introduced Scrum for about 4 months, I think. And then at the end, the management said, okay, well, what changed, what improved because you introduced Scrum? And then we had to look at, how can we measure that in hindsight? And because of them having introduced the continuous improvement process already years ago, because it's a production site, we actually measured, okay, how many ideas for improvement went in beforehand, and then we introduced Scrum, and how many ideas for improvement were introduced after that. And we saw, we just had a look at it because I had a gut feeling that maybe we could see something. And actually we did see that it went up a lot. The ideas that had been handed in by team members, by employees, to actually change something increased. Why is that? I think because there was a change in mindset. I think there was more focus on what can we do to improve the system, the value flow. So we want that in order to improve self-organization and get that through a mindset of continuous improvement. The last metric that I've got for you in terms of servant leader is actually the increase in satisfaction for the Scrum Master stakeholders. Who are the Scrum Master stakeholders? The Scrum team and other people, management, etc., etc. But one question that I would have, in Agile, really, we always go about stakeholder value, customer value, user value, etc., etc. Why don't we Scrum Masters ask people what they want? And in the end, why don't we just ask, sit down with the team and say, hey, I'm your Scrum Master. You've seen how I work. How much money from your budget would you actually spend on me? If it were up to you, how much money would you spend on my role? And then, to take this a step further, because, shouldn't be too negatively seen, to actually say, okay, well, let's have a discussion about this. What would actually make it worth the investment and why? What would you spend the money on instead and why? Use this as grounds for conversation. Have you heard of the merit money concept of Management 3.0? No? Okay. Well, again, something you can research afterwards. It's pretty much sitting down with the team and dividing up bonus systems of who in the team should get what because of their impact on the work they had done as a team. So you can use that method, and also in order to also discuss, how much money from the project budget should the Scrum Master get because of the impact that he or she has been having. Or second option, bit simpler, bit less maybe emotional, is just at the end of a sprint, ask the team, so how satisfied are you with the work of the Scrum Master this sprint? Simple question, and again, have a look at the trend over time. Very importantly, with all these metrics, I'm going to go into that at the end, always use several measurements, always use several metrics, because otherwise at some point we're just going to do stuff that is good for the team, which is good, but on the other hand, we all know as Scrum Masters, we're also supposed to irritate a little bit, always to make sure that we're still continuously changing, continuously improving. If we're always just making the Scrum team happy, we might lose sight of the little bit of annoyance that we have to create. Why do we want that? We want to foster self-organization, a culture of feedback. Has anyone ever done any of these? Has anyone ever used any of these metrics? Yeah? Which ones? Okay. For the team, okay. Nice, okay, thank you. And? Happiness? Happiness. Happiness.
We have this interruption thing. So I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the amount of time you got pulled out of context, we kind of noted by which department. So that the Scrum Master then said, okay, next time we need to go through us or whatever, so we will have less context
interruptions. Okay, so for those who didn't hear, you kind of kept a tally or just post-its or something of interruptions from different departments. You actually noted down which departments so that in the next sprint, you could talk to them and make sure that the interruptions go down. All right, so these are the 10 metrics so far. Now I've got 5 more for the topic of change agent. The first metric for change agent to see whether I'm having an impact in this aspect of my role would be the decrease of the internal costs. How do we measure that? Well, we could actually have a look at the amount of money that one story point is costing me. So how do we measure that? Or how do we calculate that? We look at how much is a sprint costing us, which we can, if we have a stable team, we know this. We know how much the people are costing us, we know what the infrastructure is costing us, we know more or less what a sprint is costing us. And then we divide this by actually the amount of story points that we are doing on average during a sprint. So this is, the velocity topic. I've actually discussed this with a few people who are doing this. They said they really like it because the Scrum Master doesn't do the estimations. So there's no fear of story point inflation or something like that, because it's just very, kept separately. So, So this is all about increasing the productivity of the Scrum team. We can measure that in terms of how much the story point costing us internally. The next metric is we want to reduce waste in the organization. How do we do that? Well, let's have a look at how much money we could or we have saved by removing impediments. So we can, on the one hand, go and take an impediment and go to management and say, look, this is because we're not removing this is costing us so and so much money. That's one thing. And on the other hand, we can actually look at hindsight. Well, we have already removed these impediments, and that's what we're saving due to that. If you're not sure about this, do have a look at Don Reinertsen's cost of delay. How many of you are using that? Not so many. Okay. Cost of delay is more or less the same thing, but for a product feature. So how much is it costing us if we're late in developing it or late in putting a product to the market? The 13th metric is the decision-making power of the Scrum team. We can measure that by actually having a look at the amount of impediments that we can't solve ourselves. So we can simply keep a tally or some kind of chart to see how many of these impediments can I solve as a Scrum team, or as a Scrum Master, I'm part of that Scrum team. So as a Scrum team, how much can we actually solve? And how much do we have to escalate because we can't solve that by ourselves? Again, we want to foster self-organization. We want to make sure that the Scrum Master can make himself or herself redundant at some point. Two more. We want to speed up the value flow to the customer. How would you measure that? The value flow. Any Kanban experts here? How would you measure it? Yeah. So let's look at the lead time. What's lead time? Lead time is the moment that the customer or user, whoever, says, hey, I really want this. Product owner takes it down to it is delivered. That is the lead time. Yes, we are working in sprints, but the lead time is still different most of the time. So we want to shorten this lead time. We want to make it the value flow from the customer tells us something, or we find an idea, or we think of something, to we actually deliver it and somebody can use it, somebody can pay for it. We want to shorten this time. And so that is the so-called lead time. And the last metric that I want to introduce to you today is we want to increase customer value. How do you measure that? How do you measure customer value in your teams, in your organizations? I think there's one that's very standard out there, which is the so-called Net Promoter Score. So how likely is it that your customers would be, recommending you, promoting you? You could do that. Most companies have that already to see whether that's going up or not. And another option would be to actually, again, use a sprint review, where you actually sit down with your stakeholders and maybe have a quick feedback, like survey or questionnaire, or even, just a thumbs up or thumbs down or a feedback door, something that's really simple, and actually ask them, on a scale from 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with us? How satisfied are you with us in terms of collaboration, in terms of value creation, in terms of delivery, quality, speed, etc., and why? Look at the trend. Is it going up? Is it getting better? So that's what I would really be looking at. Is anyone using any of those 5 metrics? Yeah, which ones? Of the survey, the stakeholder survey at the sprint review, okay? So like a feedback form online or something like that for the user. Okay, so for every upgrade or for every new version to have a feedback form for the users. Thank you. And there was one more. Lead time. Okay, thanks. All right, so now that you've got all these metrics, or these ideas for metrics, I think I left out about 30 more. What do I recommend? What should you do with this? Well, if you are a Scrum Master, use this as self-reflection. So really sit down for yourself and think about what do you want to achieve with Scrum? Why are you a Scrum Master? Like, why are you doing this job? What do you want to achieve with it? And very importantly, and this is something a lot of companies leave out and a lot of Scrum Masters leave out, why is it that your organization is actually doing Scrum? They want to achieve something, be it higher customer or customer satisfaction, be it faster time to market, or more employee satisfaction, or becoming more interesting in a war of talents, or whatever it is, higher quality, etc. There's a reason for it, and make sure that whatever you want to have as an impact for your Scrum team actually falls into place with the higher goal of the organization. How do you want your team to be different in 3 sprints, in half a year, in 2 years, in whatever time you want to set for yourself? Where can you add most value to the team? Everyone's different. For example, I'm not a coder. I don't know how to do that, and that's okay. I have different skills that I can add for a team. How would you define yourself as having been a good Scrum Master? And once you've defined those, or have found the answers to these questions, think about what would be good metrics to support these reflections. How could you measure your progress? And how do they actually pay into the overarching organizational goals? And then once you have that, once you've started measuring, etc., as a Scrum Master, use these metrics as a grounds for conversation. Where can you do that? Well, firstly, make sure that you have spoken to your management, your Scrum team, to, sponsors of the project or product, whatever you're doing with your Scrum team. Make sure that you've actually clarified expectations. This is what you can expect from me. This is what I'm working towards. This is what I want to achieve. This is how I would measure myself, whether I'm a good Scrum Master or not. Make sure that because of what you're measuring or of the impact that you want to achieve, you get empowerment. So if you show your management, for example, this is how much money we could be saving if we remove this impediment, so please give me the authority to do that, that's a way to get empowered. Make sure, many of you have job descriptions, many of you probably don't, because I'm finding that more and more that there is no job description for a Scrum Master out there, at least in the companies. If there is a job description, have a look at it. Is this actually reality, like the way I'm living this job, the way of what's expected of me, especially when talking to management? Are these the real expectations that they can have? And if I'm noticing the job description has nothing of the above of what I've been talking about for the past 30 minutes in it, well, maybe your organization is not ready for agility yet. Maybe your organization is at the very start of an agile journey, which is okay, that's absolutely fine, but then you're more aware of it, and then again you can have a different conversation with your management and with your stakeholders. And last but not least, do use these metrics to talk about your salary. There's a lot of people changing towards the Scrum Master role, and then suddenly their salary stagnates. Why? If you're having this impact that we're discussing, that you can measure, your salary could increase immensely and should really. So I want to wrap this up by actually making sure that we have a common grounds in terms of how to use metrics, because metrics, there's a reason why they're a bit tricky. So when you do work with metrics, make sure that the chosen metrics are actually not just quick wins, but they're for the long term. They're a sustainable metric. It's not about looking good, it's about actually making an impact. Secondly, make sure to always use a variety. So don't just measure team happiness, or stakeholder feedback, or story point value. Just make sure you use a variety, at least one metric from each of these 3 aspects of the role of a Scrum Master. Try different ones. Don't just use mine. Please, there's so many more. I'm sure if you have a little conversation afterwards, you'll find out even more. Thirdly, and this is, in terms of openness, Scrum value, it's an interesting one. I would recommend not to tell your teams. Why? Because us humans, a system is always designed to actually focus on the metric and to improve so that we improve the outcome of the metric. We don't make sure that we improve the system. So if you're not telling the team, you're actually getting a more honest and more objective result. And then once you have that result, sit down with them, sit down with the team and actually discuss it. How can we improve this? What's your solution? Do you see this similarly? What's going on here? 4th point, always measure in relation to the past. So do not, compare yourself to other teams or to the Scrum Masters or to other, teams from other companies. There's no point in that. Just always measure related to the past of this one team. And then, last but not least, make sure you continuously change metrics. So once you've spoken to the team, once you've actually openly discussed it, hey, I've been measuring this, and there's this and this trend, or there's not, tell them, think about solutions, maybe see what it's improving, and then immediately change metrics and don't tell them again. What should you not do? Just a few don'ts. Don't use the same metric too often. Always look behind the metrics and understand why. Don't just take the numbers, understand why, which is why I recommend very much to use, instead of, for example, dots, use post-its, because on a post-it you can write something. Don't abuse the data. Not okay. You know, we're very ethical people as Scrum Masters, so don't abuse the data that you're collecting. Don't compare teams, I've said this already. And make sure not to annoy your team. So if you're measuring too much or measuring too complicated or something, they will get really irritated. So make sure it's just very simple. So we're talking an app where you can swipe, or one of those airport feedback stands, or a dot that you can put up, or like a ping pong that you can put in. Just gamify it a little bit. So I want to close this session with a call to action. So if you are a Scrum Master, think about it. Think about what we've discussed, what I've been saying for the past 40 minutes, and think about how you actually want to measure yourself. How will you notice that there's something different? How will you notice improvement? Then start measuring. Again, start with a variety of metrics, and then take the data that you found over a certain amount of sprints, or even half a year, or a year, I don't know, it depends on the Scrum Master, depends on the metric. Take it and discuss it with the people you want to discuss it with. Mostly your team, maybe your management, and maybe some other stakeholders, I don't know, project sponsors, etc. And then go back to step 1. If you're not a Scrum Master, go talk to your Scrum Master. Thank you very much. If you have any more questions, I'll be here until tomorrow afternoon. Good luck.